Hello, I'm Tom from Goblin King Games, makers of Moonstone, and I think it's probably time that we do another how to play video. We made one a couple of years ago and it's now looking a bit out of date. So what I'm going to cover today is the size of the game, what to expect from it generally, how to grow moonstones, which is how you start the game and generally setting up, energy, which is our form of action points, how you get it, how you lose it. I will also cover all the actions that you can do in the game, like moving and attacking, shooting people, that sort of thing. I will cover our arcane actions, especially, which uses a special card deck to resolve the conflict. And I'll also do a dive into our melee mechanic, which uses another custom card deck of specialist attacks. So if I start with the size of the game, it's a tabletop skirmish game. It's familiar size to a lot of players that have played other games of that type. We recommend 12 characters on the board for a game that lasts around an hour and a half for experienced players. Now, Moonstone is a 2, 3 or 4 player game, so we still recommend 12 characters on the board if you want the game to last that consistent amount of time. So if there was a 2 player game, you'd have 6 per side. If there was a 3 player game, you'd have 4 per side, and a 4 player game, 3 per side, for example. So it's an alternating activations game, similar to others out there. So you choose one character, you perform actions, and when you're complete, you pass to the next player. They choose one character and perform actions until all characters on the board have completed their actions. So, the way you start the game. The name of the game is Moonstone. There are these magic stones that over the last 5 years or so have started growing up in the middle of the night, and they glow. And nobody knows quite what for, but the wizards in the Tower of Grommel are paying an absolute fortune for them. Unbeknownst to you as the players, you don't know why, but you don't care. They're worth a fortune. It all will be revealed later on, but for the time being, it's a top secret. So these moonstones are growing up just recently in the night, and the way we start the game is you just drop some D4s, and wherever they land, that represents where moonstones have grown up overnight. And the number on the dice is how difficult they are to grow up, to dig up. Effectively, how much action points, how many energy tokens you need to use to dig them up. So, energy, we have a stat card. I'll probably flash it up on screen so that you can see it bigger. This one is for Baron von Fancy Hat, and you can see along the bottom there are 7 circles, which represents his health bar. So every time he takes a wound, you have to dob one in, starting from the right. At the start of each turn, you generate energy, and the amount of energy you generate is equal to the number of blue circles on the base of the card, excluding ones that have already been filled in. So as a character takes wounds, they start to generate less energy. So Baron von Fancy Hat in this case will start with 2 energy. So I will put 2 on his card. And I'm also going to use in this demo game Doug the Flatulent. So he starts, I've put his card up now. Goblins generally have a lot more energy than humans. They're more fragile, and they don't stick around very well when they take a hit, but they're much faster and can do more. So he's going to get 4 energy, and I will grab those 2 characters out of the cabinet now, and I can start demonstrating some of the actions. So, Baron von Fancy Hat versus Doug the Flatulent Classic. So the game start set and the card deck that you can buy from Moonstone comes with a cheat sheet. And on the cheat sheet is a list of actions that are available to the characters. So let's start with movement. There's two types of movement that you can do in Moonstone. There is a jog action, which costs no energy. You can do it once per turn, and it allows you to move up to 4 inches. Now, you can only do it once per turn, and you're also restricted in certain ways. You can't move through water features, you can't move through wooded patches, you can't move through windows with a jog, and most importantly, you can't move away from an engaging enemy. So if Baron von Fancy Cat started off within 3 inches of Doug the Flatulent, because Doug the Flatulent has a 3-inch melee range because of his long lance, if you start within Doug's melee range, he can still perform a jog action, but he can't at any point move away from Doug. If you imagine you were actually in the real world and there was a goblin knight with a lance within poking distance of you, you wouldn't just casually turn your back and start jogging away. However, you are allowed to use your jog actions to move in, or to circle around. The requirement is at no point in the move can you move away. So that's jogs. The other kind of action is steps. Now, steps cost 1 energy. It can be done as many times in the turn as you like, and it allows you to move 1 inch. So I'm going to move Doug in here, 1 inch. And the step action is a really special and interesting action for a few reasons. Firstly, it's unrestricted. You can move through water features and wooded patches. Secondly, you can move away from an engaging enemy. If you don't like the look of this fight and you want to move away from it, you can use steps. You can even use steps, what we have is called a reaction step, outside of your activation. So normally, when a character activates, they've got a certain amount of energy to spend, and they do as many actions as they like, and when their energy's used up, the next character goes. Now in Moonstone, you don't have to use all of your energy during your activation. There's 2 ways that you can use it out of activation, and this is the main one. So you can do all of your steps in advance, say to get away from someone, even though you haven't activated yet. Cool, so what other actions do we have? A very simple one, a traverse action. If you are at one side of an obstacle, which could be, in this case, some boxes, it could equally be a window or a door, you can spend 2 energy to move yourself to the other side of it, a maximum move of 1 inch. If you, other actions, of course, the most important one, a harvest action. So if you move a character, if you have a character who's already in base contact with a Moonstone, they can perform a harvest action. It costs 1 energy to drop the value of the stone down by 1. So this stone is showing a 2, so we would spend 1 energy to drop it to a 1. If it's already showing a 1 and you spend your 1 energy for a harvest action, you pick it up. So he spends 1 energy and he's now in possession of it. And now the human side, although there's only 1 per side, is now in the lead because they've got 1 Moonstone and the Goblin player doesn't. Let's pop that back. Okay, so other actions. We've pretty much covered the basic ones. Then we've got active abilities. Now these are the ones which are printed directly on the card. So if I flash up Doug the Flatulence card, for example, these are abilities like foul gases and charge. These work exactly the same way as the normal actions, but they are specific to each character. So you simply pay the amount of energy in brackets, and then you get the effect written underneath. Okay, so we will go on to, if I've covered all the actions, yep, the main ones coming up is Arcane. Okay, so the Arcane, let's say for example Baron von Fancy Hat wants to shoot at Doug the Flatulent here. So we look on Baron von Fancy Hat's card, and at the bottom of the card you can see an arcane ability called Shoot Pistol. You can tell it's an arcane ability because it's got a coloured rectangle, a card icon, in this case a green card with an X. And that tells us that we're looking for a green card out of this arcane deck. The colours on the cards are green, blue and pink. And within each of those colours they are numbered 1, 2 or 3. There are actually 3 1s, 2 2s and 1 3. So the 3s are much less likely to come up. So Baron von Fancy Hat looks at his stat card, he can see that he has an arcane stat of 3 and he's going to use his Shoot Pistol ability to shoot Doug the Flatulent. So he draws 1, 2, 3 arcane cards. And unbeknownst to the Doug player, because this would be a secret only to the Baron von Fancy Hat player, I've drawn a 1 green, a 1 blue and a 1 pink. Now the Doug the Flatulent player is going to draw 6, he's called the resisting player in this situation, he's going to draw 6 cards of his own. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, back to me being Baron von Fancy Hat. I have to choose a card from my hand and I then place it face down on the table, and it's face down and then I declare what it is and I don't have to tell the truth. So my ability, Shoot Pistol, is triggered on a green card and the effect is after the colon. So the target suffers X plus 1 impact damage. So X is whatever the value of the card. So I've just put down a green 1. But I could say, if I wanted to, which currently would do 2 damage, X plus 1, 2. I could say, no, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to say that's a green 3. It's face down. I have 2 more cards in hand. Now the Doug the Flatulent player looks at his own hand. It's 6 cards, and remember there's only 1 3 in the deck. So he's going to have a look and see if he's got a green 3, because then he knows I'm lying, which he doesn't. So he can't prove the lie. So now he's just going to be looking in my face thinking, are you telling the truth or not? But he does have in hand a catastrophe card, which is a good one. So if the Baron von Fancy Hat player, if the Doug the Flatulent player just says okay, that's fine, then the green 3 damage just goes through. The Baron von Fancy Hat player doesn't have to show the card. It just does, in this case, X plus 1, 4 damage to Doug the Flatulent. However, Doug the Flatulent doesn't believe him. So the Doug the Flatulent player says, no, you're calling a bluff, in which case the Baron von Fancy Hat player has to reveal his card. He reveals the green 1, and he had said that it was a green 3. So, because he lied, because he was caught out bluffing, the Doug the Flatulent player gets to replace the played card with 1 from his resist hand. So, the Doug the Flatulent player could replace that green 1 with a blue 1. Now the requirement of the ability, which was a green card, is met, so you don't get the effect. And that means, in effect, the shot misses. However, the Doug the Flatulent player actually has a catastrophe card. Now, if he replaces the Baron von Fancy Hat's pistol shot card with a catastrophe, then instead the Baron von Fancy Hat player suffers the catastrophe effect on his arcane ability, in which case this character suffers 3 wounds. So in this case, the Baron got caught out bluffing, and a catastrophe occurred, and his gun exploded. You don't have to play a hand of Arcane. If you draw your cards and you don't have a card that triggers your ability, you don't want to bluff, you don't have to, you can just pass your hand, throw cards away, and you lose the energy, but you're not forced to bluff. So why would you always pull a bluff? If you're being shot at with a pistol, why wouldn't you just always say bluff every single time? Well, the reason is, if the player was found to be telling the truth, so if I go back to Baron von Fancy Hat, and let's say this time I've got a slightly better hand, and my hand includes a green 2 and a green 1. Say for example, I put my card down and I declare that it is a green 2, and the Doug the Flatulent player doesn't believe me and makes me reveal my card. It is a green 2, so Doug is now going to take 2 plus 1, x plus 1, 3 damage, and the Baron von Fancy Hat player gets to play again with the remaining cards in his hand. So he gets to put another card down, face down, and this time he declares it to be a green 1. And the Doug the Flatulent player says, no, still don't believe you. So you reveal, it is a green 1. Doug now takes another 2 damage. And the Baron von Fancy Hat player can go again if he wishes, but in this case, because he's got a blue 1, which was be a miss anyway, and he can tell that the Doug player is keen on calling bluffs at every opportunity, he's just going to pass. So the Doug the Flatulent would take, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 damage in total from that pistol shot. So that's Arcane. Now I'm going to go on to melee. So, if you have an enemy within your melee range, so in this case Doug the Flatulent has got a melee range of 3 and Baron von Fancy Hat has got a melee range of 2. If you have an enemy within your melee range, then one of the actions that you're allowed to take is a melee attack action. It costs 1 energy to initiate an attack, and we can see that if Doug were to want to, because of his long lance, he could initiate a melee attack against Baron von Fancy Hat, whereas Baron von Fancy Hat's 2 inches of melee is not enough to initiate attack against Doug. So, interestingly, let's say we're the Doug player and we've recently been shot at by Baron and we don't like that very much. And let's say we were back here. We could use our jog action, which is up to 4 inches. We could jog in. Now we could jog all the way up, fairly up close, but that will bring us within 2 inches of the Baron's sword. And in Moonstone, unlike a lot of other games, you can both deal damage to one another in melee. Doesn't matter who initiated the attack, there's a small bonus for being the attacker in the form of getting 2 extra cards, but as long as you're both within one another's weapon reach, you can both theoretically deal damage to one another, or perhaps even the defender deals damage and the attacker doesn't. It will all be revealed by the cards in a second. So let's say Doug's being a sneaky goblin and decides he doesn't want to come within 2 inches of the Baron, but he does want to be within 3. So he's going to move to around about there, so that he's within his 3 and outside of the 2. Now, remember I mentioned about reaction steps. Doug has just performed an action, a jog action. After any opposing character performs an action, anyone on the board, just him in this case, any character on the board can, if they wish, say, I'm going to make a reaction step. It's exactly like that. It costs 1 energy, moves you 1 inch. The Baron's got a couple of interesting options here. He could step out, which would cost 1 inch, and would move him to there. And now, Doug the Flatulent's going to be outside of his 3-inch range, so with his next action he now can't initiate a melee attack. He may, however, spend 1 energy to step 1 inch closer. And in this way you can often get in Moonstone chase sequences where you move out, they move back in, they move out, you move back in. And it becomes a case of who's going to run out of energy first. This is a really popular tactic for fairies who have loads of energy, typically 5 energy, and let's say they're being chased by a giant and they very much don't want to be hit by a giant. They often play in a reactive way where they keep their energy back and they use these reaction steps to avoid, and then let's say the giant's got 2 energy, which they normally do, and the fairy's got 5. They spend 2 energy to exhaust the giant, and then they're free to blast him with magic afterwards. However, the Baron von Fancy Hat is not a sissy, despite what he might look like, and instead of moving 1 inch back to get out of Doug's melee range, he's going to move 1 inch in. Now this means if fortune favours the brave, if Doug is to initiate a melee attack with his next action, then Baron von Fancy Hat can at least deal damage back. So in Moonstone, melee is simultaneous. A lot of games I've played in the past, I haven't particularly enjoyed the melee because it's felt like when you're on the receiving end, you're just a store dummy. You know, you're just waiting while somebody goes chop, chop, chop. They're rolling their dice. Oh, I've got 2 5s. You know, that's 2 wounds. Okay, now it's my turn. You have to stand still. Chop, chop, chop. Oh, I've done 3 wounds back to you. I've done various forms of sword fighting and competitive fighting with other weapons, and that doesn't feel to me anything like the way combat really feels. If you lunge in, you are putting yourself at risk. You know, as soon as you're within the range of the enemy's weapon, they could hit you back. The more, you can decide to be cautious, or you can be really aggressive with your moves. If you're aggressive, you're more likely to suffer damage in return. So I wanted to create a game that had that feel. So Moonstone, during melee, it uses a deck of cards. There are 6 different combat moves that you can make. They've got names like Falling Swing and Sweeping Cut. They're quite cinematic. So there are effectively 3 quite aggressive cards, Falling Swing, a Thrust and a Rising Attack, a high, middle and a low, that generally deal quite high damage, but are vulnerable to taking damage in return. And then you have corresponding 3 more defensive cards with blue backgrounds, which is a high guard, a sweeping cut, and a low guard. Those cards generally don't suffer a great deal of damage, but they don't tend to deal very much either. So if you don't like the look of a fight, if you are stuck in this fight, you weren't able to use energy to reaction step away, and you're a goblin wizard in combat with a giant, you might very well be looking at those defensive cards as your best option, because they're going to at least reduce the damage you do, and you're not thinking that there's any point trying to damage the opponent anyway. If 2 players play defensive cards, one player plays a high guard and the other plays a low guard, they're just going to, nothing's going to happen. They're just going to look at one another funny. If 2 players play aggressive cards, one player does a Falling Swing and the other one does a Rising Attack, they're just going to injure one another, and it's going to be a bloodbath, and they're both going to take wounds. Where it gets quite interesting is when one player chooses a defensive card and the other player chooses an attacking card. So let's say a player plays a Thrust and the other player plays a Sweeping Cut. In this case, the Sweeping Cut, you're going to knock all their damage aside and reduce it to nothing. So let's go ahead now and do an example using Baron von Fancy Hat and Doug the Flatulent. So let's say Baron von Fancy Hat plays a Falling Swing, and Doug the Flatulent looks at his hand of cards and makes his choice and chooses a Rising Attack. Then we look on on our own card for the name of our opponent's card. So Baron von Fancy Hat player who's played a Falling Swing finds the Rising Attack, which was the card played by the Dog player, and he reads off the amount of damage he's dealt. In this case, 3. The Dog player does exactly the same. He finds the opponent's card on his and reads off the amount of damage he's dealt. 1. So that's how that works. Another example, let's say Baron von Fancy Hat plays a Rising Attack and Doug the Flatulent plays a Low Guard. You read off the amount of damage that, let's say, Baron has done to Doug. You find his Low Guard and you can see that you've dealt 0 damage. There's a difference between 0 and 0 because there are modifiers for weapons and armour. 0 means you always do none. And then if we went over to Doug's card, you find the Rising Attack on his card. It's deal 0, but it's in a yellow circle. And this is the free hit. You know, someone's attacked you low, you've guarded low, you now get to do a riposte. So the Dog player might look at the remaining cards in his hand and go, what does the most damage against a Rising Attack? Oh, I'll play this thrust of my own. So I've guarded low and then I thrusted back in. So in that case, he's reduced all of the incoming damage to 0. He's dealt 0 damage, so in that initial Rising Attack versus Low Guard, but in the follow-up attack, he's going to play a thrust. He looks for the Rising Attack now on his thrust, and it's 2 damage. So that's a couple of examples of how that can work. Melee is often most interesting when one player has played an aggressive move and the other has played a defensive move. And there are ways and means of trying to predict what move your opponent might play, which I'll go into in a second. But let's just dive right in and do an actual round of melee between these two now. So Doggers threatens the Baron. The Baron could have run away, but he's decided, to face up to it, and fortune favours the brave and get stuck in. So Doug is now going to draw a number of melee cards equal to his melee stat, which is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and he gets a bonus 2 for being the attacker. It's a small bonus as they're both able to deal damage to one another, but if combat's inevitable, you might as well be the attacker. You get that small bonus. Baron von Fancy Hat on defense is going to draw a number of cards equal to his melee stat, which is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I look at my hand as Baron von Fancy Hat, I can see that I've got 2 Low Guards. This is very interesting. There's only 3 of each melee move in the deck. So if you have all 3, you know the opponent can't possibly have one, and you know that the best card against a Low Guard defends against the Rising Attack. You know that any Rising Attacks you might have are going to get through unanswered. So that's interesting. This Baron von Fancy Hat player has a Sweeping Cut, a Falling Swing, and a Rising Attack. So the Falling Swing is appealing because it's his signature move, which we haven't discussed yet, but it basically means he's more effective. And the Rising Attack is also very tempting because I can see my opponent's unlikely to have a Low Guard because I've got 2 of them. I also need to be aware of the different damage types that the various cards do, because if you look on Baron von Fancy Hat's stat card, you can see that his longsword, if it deals slicing or piercing melee damage, it increases the damage by 1. So I want to choose a card that does either slicing or piercing damage, which all of them do. So I'm going to go, as the Baron von Fancy Hat player, I'm going to choose this Rising Attack. Right, now let's pretend we're Doug for a second and we're looking at our hand of cards. He's going to he can see he's got 2 sweeping cuts, a low guard, a high guard, a thrust and a falling swing. So there's only 2 aggressive cards, and a thrust and the falling swing. Now if you look at Doug's stat card and look at his weapon, his lance, if this character deals slicing melee damage, reduce the damage to 0. So although I've got 2 sweeping cuts, and ordinarily having duplicates is a good thing because you're allowed to play critical hits. You play both cards and the damage is doubled or trebled if you have all 3. So normally you like to look out for duplicates. In this case, the damage type on the sweeping cut is slicing. And Doug's card says if you deal slicing, reduce it to 0. So they're out. We're not interested in those. We're not interested in a high guard or a low guard this time round. You know, we're initiating this melee attack. We don't, you know, we want to get stuck in and do some damage. We're not going to go for those. So it's between the thrust and the falling swing. Now for Doug, the thrust is more interesting because it deals piercing damage. And his lance does +1 if he deals piercing damage. If he chooses the falling swing, his only damage type options are impact and slicing. Slicing does 0, impact he gets no benefit for. So he can do a falling swing, he can smack someone on the top of the head with his lance, but it's nowhere near as powerful as thrusting with it and trying to pierce them. So Doug the Flatulent is going to opt for a thrust in this case. So we look at what each character has done to one another. Nobody managed to play duplicates, so nobody got any critical hits. So let's look at Baron von Fancy Hat's damage to Doug, first of all. So we find Doug's thrust on our rising attack. So we can see that the rising attack against the thrust deals 1 damage. Now because Baron von Fancy Hat's got his long sword, if this character deals slicing or piercing damage, increase the damage by +1. And we can see on a rising attack, it's a very versatile attack. It can choose from any of the 3 damage types. It generally does quite low damage, but it generally gets damage through against most opponent cards. So there's different characteristics for all the different moves, which make them quite interesting. But the Baron's going to choose slicing as his damage type. He's going to slice up underneath that shield because his long sword gets +1 when it deals slicing damage. And if we look at Doug's armour, his jousting shield reduces piercing and impact damage by -1. So by going for that slicing, he gets the full damage, he gets his own benefit, but without Doug's armour being of any use in this case. So he's going to deal, we find the thrust, 1 damage +1 for the long sword. Doug is going to take 2 damage. Now, Doug's card in return, you find the rising attack on the thrust, and you can see that his thrust has done 2 damage. He also gets to add +1 because the damage type is piercing for his lance, which takes it up to 3. However, Baron von Fancy Hat's full plate armour is reduces all incoming damage by -2 apart from magical damage. So Baron in this case takes 1 damage instead. And I'm going to do one more example of melee, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate signature moves this time round. So, Doug the Flatulent's going to spend 1 more energy for an attack. If we were playing a game, we'd move the token off the card. And he's going to draw 6 cards again. 3 for his melee stat, +2 for being an attacker. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Baron von Fancy Hat is going to draw 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, I'm going to do Baron von Fancy Hat first of all. And I was hoping to demonstrate signature moves, and this is excellent because in my hand I have 2 falling swings. So, of those 6 different moves, every single character has got one of the moves which is their special move. They can upgrade one of the standard moves into a better version. For Baron von Fancy Hat, the move that he can upgrade is a falling swing. It says on the bottom of his card. So, I'll explain how that works when we get to the damage dealing phase, but suffice to say he's delighted because he can play 2 falling swings, so the damage is doubled. It's also an option for him to upgrade it to his signature move, which is cool. And if he looks at the rest of the cards in hand, he can see he has a high guard, so he's less likely to be defended against. So Baron's made his choice, and you don't reveal until you're both ready, until you both say, yes, I'm ready to reveal. So he's just going to say, yep, I've chosen my cards. Let's have a little look at Doug's hand then, see what Doug might do in this situation. So Doug has got 2 rising attacks, this is very appealing, and 2 thrusts. So again, lots of damage potential as he's got 2 options, both do piercing damage, which is good for his lance, and both of them are duplicates, which means they're going to double up. So, which is he to go for? Let's say he goes for the thrust, okay? He fancies the thrust. So they both players now say, yeah, I'm ready, I've chosen my cards, and you simultaneously reveal. So Baron von Fancy Hat has played 2 falling swings, and Doug the Flatulent has played 2 thrusts. So let's do Doug's damage against the Baron first of all. So you look on the thrust, you find the falling swing, and you can see it does 2 damage. Because he played a critical hit, it's duplicated up to 4 damage. Then he gets +1 for his lance, 5 damage. But -1 for Baron von Fancy Hat, sorry, -2 for Baron von Fancy Hat's plate armour. He gets 3 damage through in total. That was a really solid thrust to the chest. And then if we look at Baron von Fancy Hat, he finds the thrust on his falling swing. Now, unfortunately, even though he played a duplicate, when you find the thrust on the falling swing, the damage dealt is 0. So he would get 0 plus 0 plus 1 for his longsword. It's only 1 damage, that's a bit disappointing. However, remember I said about signature moves? So Baron von Fancy Hat has played his card which he can upgrade to a signature move. So he declares now that he's going to do so, and now these 2 falling swings both become a copy of this better version of falling swing that's on the back of his card. Now against the thrust, the normal falling swing just does 0 damage. He went up to +1 for his sword, but the master strike does 1 damage. Hooray! So we're going to do 1 damage times 2 for the duplicates, +1 for the longsword is now 3 damage. But most importantly, this damage result is in a yellow circle. So where normally, which is a follow-up attack. So where normally you only get a free hit on someone if you correctly guess, you know, the right height and defend against it, and you normally do no damage and then get your follow-up attack. This is why his signature move is so great, because it's a damage dealing attack. It actually did more damage than the standard falling swing, and it's allowing him to now do a follow-up attack. So you can look at the remaining cards in his hand and see what he's got. He had 2 sweeping cuts, that's what he had left. So he can play both those sweeping cuts as well, and against the thrust, they each deal 0 damage with a follow-up attack. So he can go, the 0 becomes +1 for his sword, because it's a follow-up attack he gets to go again, another +1 for his sword. So what he's actually effectively done is make 4 different attacks. Falling swing, master strike, falling swing, master strike, so follow-up attack on both of those, and then he gets the follow-up attack on his 2 sweeping cuts as well. So, now, Doug the Flatulent went reasonably cautious there because he chose to engage Baron von Fancy Hat at a distance, and then obviously when Baron von Fancy Hat stepped in, he was careless and thought, oh, I'll just go for it anyway. It would have been interesting if the Doug the Flatulent character instead had used the charge ability on his on his stat card, one of his active abilities, which costs 2 energy. So what he could have done is he could have jogged his 4 originally, and then spent 2 energy to initiate a charge action. So the charge action says, choose a target within 6 inches, which he easily is, move this model 4 inches directly towards the target enemy, which he now is in base contact. If this character's next action is a melee attack against the same target, it deals +2 damage. So if we'd have played exactly the same cards again, the Baron von Fancy Hat played his Falling Swings, but Doug this time has chosen to play the Rising Attacks that he had in his hand. The reason Doug has now changed his mind and is choosing to do a Rising Attack in this scenario, following the charge, is because Doug's signature move, Ankle Biter, where the pug dog gets involved, is a signature on a Rising Attack. However, it says that it deals 0 damage against models that are further than 1 inch away. So if Doug uses his charge ability and he comes crashing in, not only does he get +2 damage on his first attack, he also now has much more powerful upgrades to the Rising Attack, because the dog can now bite. So now he can thrust with the lance, or he can let the dog bite underneath. So if we'll forget about Baron's attacks because, well no, let's do the Baron again. So the Baron against the Rising Attack this time around. We'll look at here, we'll look on his Falling Swing for the Rising Attack, and we can see this time he's going to deal 3 damage. It's duplicated because he has 2 of them, so he goes up to 6 damage, and then he gets +1 for his sword, so it goes up to 7 damage, so that's really nasty actually. So the Baron in this case has now done 7 damage to Doug. Let's have a look at what Doug has done to the Baron. So Doug looks to find the Baron's Falling Swing on his card. He can see that he does 1 damage, +1 damage. If he makes it piercing, it goes up to 3 damage, but it's -1 for the Baron von Fancy Hat's full plate armour, so we'd end up with 1. So that would be rubbish. Well, actually, he would gain another +2 for charging. So in this situation, if it wasn't for signature moves, the Baron would have done 7 damage to Doug, and Doug would have done 3 damage back. Most of that was the +2 from the charge. It's very difficult to get through full plate armour unless you've got magical attacks. So, however though, it is his signature move, so Doug can upgrade it to the Ankle Biter, and now when he looks at the Falling Swing, which was the card that the Baron von Fancy Hat played, it now says deal 3. So he's got 3, and he played 2 of them, +3. Plus another 2 for charging. That's 8 damage. -2 for the plate armour still means that he gets 6 damage through in total. So the Baron is actually left with only 1 wound in this situation. So that's some examples of melee. It's something that you probably want to give a try a few times to get the feel for it. But it's certainly one of the more engaging, interesting parts of the game where you're trying to read your opponent, trying to guess what they're going to play. One of the ways you can do that is by looking at the cards in your own hand. You know, if you've got all 3 Falling Swings, you know they can't play a Falling Swing. If you've got 2, you know they're unlikely to, and that might dictate what card you play. This is where having a big hand of cards is really useful. Another reason why having a big hand of cards is useful is you get those power-ups, and you're more likely to be able to choose your card, which is your signature move. When you're trying to work out what your opponent's going to play, obviously being aware of their signature move is important because they're more tempted to play that one. So you can deploy the right counter attack to it, and then you get into a bit of a double bluff. You know, I know that your better move is that, so you might actually now change it to something else. And yeah, that's melee. So I'm hoping to do plenty more videos. I'm hoping to do some playthrough videos. Apologies if this was a little disjointed, had a bit of technical issues with the camera cutting out a few times, so I may have repeated myself or missed bits out, but unfortunately that's the way it goes. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. There's going to be plenty more Moonstone content coming out in the near future, and thanks for watching.